to day 2 of the Festival of Learning and Teaching. We've got another jam-packed day for you today, so hopefully you're up and ready and energized for all the conversations and presentations we have to follow. And to kickstart the proceedings for today, we've got a bit of an alternative format for an opening plenary. We're going to have a bit of a dialogue interview style opening session between Professor Bernadette Byrne, who is Associate Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and Emina Hogas, who is the Vice President Education from the Student Union. So I'm going to hand over to you to kickstart the session. We'll have about 25 minutes of the dialogue, and then we can open up for some Q&A from the audience and get the conversation going. So yeah, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Before I start my little introduction, I would like to preface it with a little disclaimer that while I am an elected student representative, I cannot possibly speak on behalf of every Imperial student. However, I will hope to provide a very broad understanding of what those needs are today. So without further ado, how do we actually answer the question of how we prepare our class of 2030 based on the strategy, right? Of graduates equipped with advanced skills training and values-driven leadership needed to thrive in a tech-enabled world. That's quite the mouthful. Because if we're honest, the strategy only holds as much weight as the final year student ready to actually embrace the job market and how prepared they feel about it. So today I want to speak a little bit about that based on some research that I've done with our current student body. So when asked how well they feel prepared by their degrees, our students scored it around 2.7 out of 3. And that's when we remove the first and second year respondents, that still only gives us a score about 3. So it doesn't really seem like our graduates are feeling particularly confident in this. And while I acknowledge that the sample size of an odd 20 is pretty small, the qualitative responses are quite coherent, specific, and consistent to this. And these aren't students who don't know what they want, but are students who are actually trying to tell us what might be missing from our offering. So starting off with the good before we get to the bad, what are they actually getting? And I don't think it comes as any surprise to many of us here, but they're quite happy with the technical skills that they're receiving. They feel quite prepared. We have physics and engineering graduates who often name data skills, maths, problem solving as core competencies that they're satisfied with the transferability across engineering roles. We have earth science and engineering students happy with the fieldwork provision. They name the Cypress trip as the most employment relevant part of their course. Life scientists cite their research and writing skills that they're particularly confident in. However, we'll see in a minute how ready for work is quite different to ready for academia. There's quite a distinction when it comes to that. So now if we were to look at what students say is missing, I treat it as 3 large categories. One would be the academic industry divide. So as I mentioned, most of our students actually feel that our courses kind of point them to one specific direction. There's not a lot of guidance for students looking to explore alternate career paths or have any form of support, of in-course built support around different pathways for this. And this is particularly relevant to our class of 2030 strategy because we would like to have our graduates move around the world into careers in and beyond STEM. So how are we actually looking to achieve that? And then we also have industry-specific gaps. So we're now in the age of AI, which is it's shaken things up quite a bit since the strategy came out. Not only that, but we have students who are looking at other HE providers and seeing that there's a bit of a gap in what we provide versus what they do. So some graduates have named either AI integration into their degrees or more stream-specific skills that are lacking in our provision. And then lastly, this might come as a surprise to some, might not, but that would be soft skills and employment literacy. We have early life scientists that cite the need for more workshops, employment literacy early on in their careers, and also guidance around what modules and elections to select, because when we then look at our later year students, They've kind of figured it out themselves. They've gone to the resources that we provide. However, it might be a bit too late to actually change the trajectory of their careers. We have a civil engineering student who reflects on the need for project management skills and how, when asked how to deal with how to handle a team, the academic that they sought support from just told them to handle it themselves. So we teach our students how to solve for the dynamics of a bridge, but not for the dynamics of a team under pressure. So there's a little bit of a mismatch in that. And this also points to the point in their degrees at which we actually intervene. We need to catch them a lot earlier than we are currently with the support services that we offer and the career guidance. And lastly, I want to touch very briefly on the wider landscape. So if I were to address the LF agent in the room, our students are describing something that's not unique to us. It is, in fact, a global phenomenon now with the introduction of generative AI and availability to the average user. And I would actually like to point you to Wonki's recent piece. I know some members in the audience are already aware of it. It's called "Trained to Stop Learning," and it's a really thought-provoking piece, actually. And it makes the point that accountability is where we need to look at when it comes to AI, especially in assessment, because it's no longer a question of whether AI will be used, it's how. And when we introduce accountability to it, that's really when we see it being used productively. And ultimately, our students are incredibly scientifically, they want to learn ultimately. So it's up to us to help them do that. Lastly, if we look at the gaps between the strategy and where we are now, I don't think it's that we don't have things in place. The infrastructure exists. I think it's a matter of joining it up in a better way and making sure, again, that we capture students at the right point in their careers, well, academic careers. I don't think it's necessarily a central team. It doesn't have to be standardized. I know everybody hates that word, but I think we're on the right path for it, hopefully. Well, actually, I'll leave this. I think I'm taking up enough time. I've got a last bit, but that's more on what could change. Happy to have any questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Sorry, is my microphone on? Okay, good. So thank you very much for that, Emina. So 2030 is not that far away, is it? So we think we're well into 2026. What do you see as the biggest barrier to sort of achieving those quite sort of wide-reaching aims for class of 2030?
Well, as I mentioned, I think it has to do with joining up that infrastructure and how we also communicate that to students. Mm-hmm. It's embedding within curricula these touch points. It's not treating them as add-ons that come later in their careers. It's reaching them where they are. And we need to look at this in the landscape of what education currently is in the age of AI. A lot of students are now wondering if it's even worth it, I guess. So
when you say worth it, you mean worth it to do a degree?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's so much information online and so many qualifications that you can get from the comfort of your home and at a much lower price that we need to utilize the time that they are on campus, because our stats are showing that they're not really showing up as much as they used to. So when it comes to any other support or guidance around careers that we want to provide them with, we need to reach them where they are, which is the little time that they are in class.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, isn't it, with respect to information? Because for years I've been hearing that we give our students too much information. And it sounds like that's what your students are now telling you. It's not the information they need. It's actually these other sort of skills that they can only get by being here physically. Yeah. It's not sitting in a lecture theatre like this necessarily. Yeah. Although they do seem to quite enjoy that, in my experience, sitting in a lecture theatre.
Really?
Well, that's what my students say that. Anyway, I'll maybe ask the audience later as we go. But
No, I mean, I think, again, it's really reassessing what we can give them and how we can make use of their time when they're here, because it's less a matter of theory or teaching them how to reproduce something. And that's, I think, how our current assessments are made. They focus a lot more, and I don't want to trash any of the assessments that are truly innovative. I'm sure there's many of them out there, but I do think on the large part, we have a lot of traditional assessments that focus on testing reproduction rather than understanding of concepts, and that is a problem that AI has it's always been there, but now it's trivialized the ease with which students have access to this reproduction tool and how they can just offload that.
Yeah, so this is clearly a major issue. We need to adapt and change to that. So you've talked there about sort of change. It almost sounds like a complete overhaul of the way in which we teach our students in a way. We sort of abstract the information to different way of communicating, and then sort of what more project based, more interactions with teams and so on. And I was curious about your comment about industry, because of course Imperial is known as an extremely industry facing and collaborating with university. So it's interesting to hear that that isn't necessarily trickling down very well to the students, that they don't feel they have perhaps as many opportunities as possible in order to interact with industry partners. Would you say that's true?
I think so. I think the departments are incredibly well linked with industry links, with the industry partner, sorry. However, it doesn't really translate to the support and the opportunities provided to students. There isn't a substantial amount of support when it comes to securing a placement if you're looking to go in industry, or if you have either the year in industry or the mandatory placement as part of your degree. So I think if we try to make our industry partners a lot more visible to the average student, and just strengthen those links and make them trickle down in that way, I think that's the way forward. It's also not, when it comes to the industry links, I think they're stronger in some departments rather than others. So it's more of an exception rather than the rule, and it's making sure that we have that baseline and that parity of experience when it comes to those direct industry links.
So some universities, almost every degree is a sandwich degree, but we don't have that here. It is a student choice. Do you think that we could change it in that way?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think a lot of students would definitely prefer that, because there's a lot of effort that goes into securing work placements throughout your degree, and even afterwards. Nobody really accepts just a degree anymore. You have to have some form of research opportunity in the summer, internship, things like that. So I do think if you were to ask the average student, would you rather have a sandwich degree that gives you the experience, you have the support from the college, the university to pursue this, would you go for it? Most likely, yes. I don't think students would be mad about it, but I can also appreciate the institutional challenges that would come with that.
So you also talked about communication. So communication is a big thing, because we have multiple channels of communication, and yet we sometimes fail to let our students and our staff know what's going on. So what do you think is missing there? What do you think we could do better with respect to communicating opportunities, ways of working, change, and so on with our student body?
I think it's how we deliver it, because as you mentioned, there's so many channels for it that students are fatigued. It's what we see when it comes to surveys and asking for feedback. But I think we can now make use of different tools that are coming in our repertoire to house that information in a static place, so that, or if it's, let's say, a VLE, it's a better place to view certain information, updates, changes, than, let's say, an email that you have to go through 20 to find the essential one, if your Outlook actually searches, like the search function doesn't go awry. I'm happy I'm not the only one dealing with that.
And then what about communication the other way? Because you mentioned there's surveys, and we do survey our students a lot. Do you think they're an effective way of getting that information? Or are there other ways? Are there other things that we should be doing in order to get accurate feedback from our students?
I do think there's more personal ways we could get feedback from our students. We forget that we have supervisors, we have personal tutors, we have supposedly a lot of contact points with our students. And I think that's one of the things contributing to our students feeling lonely as well. There doesn't seem to be that connection between the staff they regularly interact with and themselves. So that would definitely be a route. I also think there should be a consolidation of the surveys that we run. We are looking to do that on the union side, where we would build a consultation hub. So again, a static portal where you don't have to shift through all of your emails. You can just go to a single dashboard and you see what's on in terms of surveys.
Okay. It's interesting. If you don't know, there's a whole college committee that looks at student surveys, and there's a lot of them, a huge number of them. So one of the things that I did check the class of 2030 description on the website this morning, and one of the words that is listed there, which you didn't mention, but which I will, given my role, is diversity. So we're supposed to be, by 2030, the most diverse community of students. Do you want to comment on where you think we are with respect to that? And then maybe I'll follow up.
We're definitely doing better. That's for sure. However, I think there's still ways we can go on this. And in terms of support that I can think for this, it's actually another wonky article that comes to mind, and it's that if we want to look at diversifying our student population, we need to think at how best we can actually financially support our students, because it's becoming a lot more expensive to be a student, especially in London and South Kensington. So dare I say, it might just be time to throw money at the problem.
Oh, that's interesting. You got quite a ripple there. We'll maybe come back to that point earlier. Okay, so let's assume we get students in, these highly diverse students. And actually, we have been quite good at doing that so far, you're right. How then do we support them when we're here? They're here.
I definitely think there should be an element of cultural awareness that happens. I know that one of my colleagues at the union is working on cultural awareness training that would go out to staff. Additional training on supervision also needs to be looked at, as it's one of the things that comes out of our surveys frequently. But I would also then go back to the financial aspect ultimately. I think that's one of the main things that acts as a barrier and allowing students to get involved in student life or just in their studies.
Okay. I wonder if it is a bit more than that, though, that there are sort of issues about belonging.
Yep.
And feeling that, looking around a lecture theatre and seeing people that are like you or have similar backgrounds. Do you still think those are problems here as well? Or?
No, for sure. I think it's something that I definitely am not the most well equipped to speak on. However, I do think we have some starting places for this. We have the mentorship schemes that I believe are really helpful. But again, it's a matter of getting those out to the right students, ensuring that staff are aware of the resources we have and they don't just bombard students with a list of this is everything we have, you pick and choose. There should be some level of filtering based on what the students' needs might be.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important point there about these. It all sort of feels like, to me, it comes back to these central contact points that students encounter while they're here. And the personal tutors, of course, are one of those. What's your perception of the tutoring process?
I definitely think it works better in some departments than others. I do have a horror story where I know of a student who, when having a meeting with their personal tutor in their final year, the tutor didn't know their name. So I think it's a little bit disjointed at times. And I think one of the things that I wanted to look at this year was renaming personal tutor so that we remove the personal out of it and make it academic or any other word that better links to development, because it manages the expectations of students so that you don't expect that personal touch, because in some places it is just not there and it won't be. And again, I really don't want to take away from the fantastic personal tutors that we have that provide that pastoral support. However, I believe that with that name change, nothing stops you from providing that pastoral support. You're still more than free to continue as you were.
Interesting. Okay, so in my last question, before we hand out to the audience, that's Ira's nodding, so I obviously timed that quite well. Is the fact that 2030 really isn't that long away? It's really not far. Have you got any sort of feeling for where we should be looking, where we should be going beyond that period of time?
Yeah, that's definitely above my pay grade. But that being said, I do think we need to, and I do think we're taking the right steps towards it, is really reframing our assessment types, looking at the wider landscape, AI especially. It needs to follow industry patterns. We have some respondents saying that they feel that their course and what they're learning feels outdated when it comes to certain skills. And that's not really a place where we want to be if we want to achieve the 2030 strategy. And not only that, but career guidance needs to happen a lot earlier. And again, it needs to be tailored to where they are in their careers rather than just, this is everything you might ever need to apply to a job. Good luck. But yeah, I think the hardest bit is assessment redesign so that we actually value understanding rather than the reproduction of information or any form of artifact.
That definitely sounds like a good hint there. I'll hand over back to Iro now to chair well, I'll chair it, but you're chairing it, aren't you?
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay, we can do it together, whatever.
Good teamwork. Okay, so hopefully you've enjoyed this slightly different style of opening session. It was meant to be an interview. I don't want to say interrogation. It was an interview and dialogue.
And here my free will.
Between the student and the academic side. So hopefully that gave everybody some food for thought and opportunity to think about how some of the things that Emina has brought out and the responses from and the questions and the prompts from Bernadette might apply to your individual practice. So we've got quite a bit of time, about 10 minutes or so for questions. So it's over to you. Anything you'd like to ask, just wait for the mic to get to you. We're going to start with you, Carolyn, and then over to you, Clodagh.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting discussion. And I really liked hearing about how students are thinking about their next step. And it made me think about the transition on the other side, because we've also, of course, been thinking about how does AI impact learning behaviors. We're thinking about diversity, the most diverse class coming in, and also the most talented class coming in. But these people coming in are soon going to come in with very different experiences from their school education as well. Thinking about the context of AI, which will be very different in both different backgrounds locally, but also across the world, where this will impact how they learn early on differently. So my question really is, do you have any thoughts on how that might impact how we should be supporting our incoming students for the class of 2030 at all?
That's a mean one. Fair enough. No, that's a very relevant question, and honestly, one that terrifies me a little bit, if I'm being fair, because there's so many different types of ways that you can use AI, both good and bad. And I think we do need to consider a good amount of unlearning that some of our students will have to go through in order to meet our standards and our way of teaching and assessing. So I'm aware that the AI futurists are working on the AI literacy course. So it's potentially something that would be embedded around that, or honestly, something as foundational as a pre-sessional course that genuinely takes them through what our expectations are in terms of assessment and how to interact with generative AI tools.
Anything from you, Bernadette?
No, I think Emina covered that very well.
Okay. Clodagh.
Okay, thanks, Emina and Bernadette. That's really useful. I worry when I hear words like lonely and belonging in this context. And I was just wondering if, and across the sector, there's a worry about students not engaging, not attending. And I'm a bit worried that if we kind of change everything, there's a sense of if we build it, they will come. And I'm just wondering if you feel that there's a cultural, generational, whatever brand you might want to put it, of people who think, you know, I'm optimizing, I have 10 different things I can do. At what point does coming to the classroom be the most important thing? Is there something we need to do on that? And it kind of relates to your previous comment, I guess, around explaining to students why it's worth their while coming in. I feel like that conversation's not happening.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we have different groups of students that don't come to campus for different reasons. There's definitely the optimizing group that has 5 deadlines on a Friday. They're just picking and choosing what works for them so that they can deal with all the workload they have. But I also think we are still seeing the effects of the COVID generation, where students aren't really used to being on campus. Again, one reason why I mentioned the financial aspect is that ultimately being on campus is quite expensive, especially for our commuter students. So that's why I unfortunately said that money might solve this when it comes to belonging, because we see that interacting with clubs and societies helps with our students. Being on campus, and not necessarily for classes, helps with belonging. It's just being around other students and not necessarily in an academic context. And there are significant costs associated with that. There's barriers to entering societies. We do have a student experience fund, but ultimately it is only available to students on a bursary. And what we currently see happening is we miss that mid category of students that are just well enough to not actually need the bursary, to not qualify, sorry, for the bursary, but they still need to take on work to make ends meet and to be able to put themselves through their degrees. And that's I think a pretty tough spot to be, because the amount of support is not really there. So I think there's definitely a piece on communicating to students the importance of being on campus, but I also think we need to do some self-assessment on how accessible it is to be on campus, especially looking at prices for our foods. I had a student rep complain the other day that the cocoa price increase is diabolical, to quote directly. I'm not even sure what it is, because I myself bring my own food from home. So we need to really look at it holistically in terms of what it means to have a sticky campus, because I know we like using that word. So we need to do a bit more to ensure it actually stays sticky.
Other questions before we, Chris?
Thank you. I was interested by what you were saying about getting students out to the lecture theatre and kind of providing more authentic learning experiences. We run an iExplore module, and sometimes I get a subtext from the students that when we bring up group work and project work, there's kind of a bit of a sigh of, oh no, I've got to do this thing that's uncomfortable, that's difficult, that's going to provide a long-term thing I need to worry about for the next 10 weeks. And it sometimes feels like there's not much enthusiasm for it. I was wondering if that's something that matches your experience, or if there are any things that might help that sort of thing go down better.
No, for sure. I personally dreaded group projects. I think my best group project was my last one in my bachelor's. It was the best one I ever had. Also my last. Great experience. Everything else, horrible. And honestly, I think it comes down to the support we have around how students are expected to interact in a team. We have very ambitious students who tend to be very lone wolves, so to speak, in terms of how they study and how they approach their academics. So we need to consider priming them with some soft skills ahead of these sessions. So again, how to navigate team dynamics, how to actually deal with confrontation in a workspace, and some other like productivity tools that would come useful in that sense. But it's also maybe looking at how we can allow them to form these groups. I do think there's a level of discomfort that they just have to go through. Nobody really likes it at first, and they just kind of get used to it. I don't think comfort is particularly conducive to growth at times, but in this case, it could have to do with the sorting element, allowing some level of flexibility and interacting with the students. But oftentimes I think also the delay in getting groups out and how you found that information used to be a gripe that people had with group work. But yeah, I think the peer review element as well is an interesting one when it comes to group work. I think students are afraid of how their mark will be affected by poor group performance. And I don't really have the answer on how we can fix that. But if we can find a way to assure students that as long as they do their bit of the work and they communicate what has worked, what hasn't within their group, their mark is safe, I think we will see a better experience in group work.
Perhaps one last question for you, Bernadette, very briefly. Just going back to Emina's suggestion of maybe changing the name for personal tutor to academic tutor, which I think is quite an interesting one, semantics-wise. How do you see that change?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually don't mind. I think it's probably quite a good idea. It just clarifies that that role maybe a little bit. I do sometimes wonder whether we use them very effectively, because students do see them relatively regularly. I see mine sort of 5-6 times a year in sort of defined time slots. And I think they are this sort of routine to give specific information. And it wasn't until you were talking that I really thought, God, that is maybe how we should be getting the feedback. They should have a final sort of sign off with their academic tutors, rather than being sort of browbeaten into filling yet another survey. I just wonder if that is actually a really good use of their expertise and their knowledge of those specific students, because they built up a relationship over 3 years, hopefully. I know, as Emina said, not everyone does it as well as they could do, but there's certainly a really good way of sort of spreading information. So things like, what's the best support for that individual student? So if you know, and I think we're changing some processes to make it easier for tutors to know which students, for example, are widening participation, then you can direct them to the correct resources, you know. So it's about signposting, but the tutor can't do that if they don't have the resources themselves. So again, a lot of the issues I think that we have with respect to correct usage of those people as a resort, as a source of information, is the communication. So much of it comes back to that, I think.
Well, that's all the time we have for this opening session. Thank you both so much for taking the time to speak to me and to us today. And hopefully that was interesting for you as well. So many thanks, both Emina